Thanks. All right, I think I'm going to go ahead and get this meeting started. So I'll go ahead and call to order this Assembly Committee on Housing and Homelessness meeting. We're noticed today from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Let's go ahead and start with introductions with committee members on the dais, and then we'll go to committee members on the phone, starting with you, Mr. Peterson.
Peterson.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry.
Dana Bowen. Forrest Dunbar.
Christopher Constant.
Austin Davidson.
Felix Rivera, and then we'll go ahead and go to members on the phone. I believe we have 3 members, so if you can just confirm that you're there. I have Jamie Allard.
Jamie Allard here.
Okay. Mr. Solt.
Ray Solt here.
And Mr. Cross.
I'm Cross here, thank you.
Do we have any other members on the phone? Okay, we're going to go ahead and get moving then. So thank you to everyone for attending this committee meeting, whether in person or on the phone. We have a pretty heavy agenda to get through today, and I want to be efficient with every minute that we have. As with the last committee, the purpose of much of today's committee meeting is to get updates on critical issues in the municipality with regards to housing and homelessness. Because of scheduling issues, I will have to close this meeting right at 12:30 p.m. when it's scheduled to end. So I'm going to ask the members of the committee and the audience to please respect the rules of decorum in this room so we can have a smooth meeting without interruption. Okay, so to start, we have 2 individuals who have signed up for initial audience participation, Mr. Davidge and Mr. Oliva. They'll each have 3 minutes. We'll start with Mr. Davidge. I don't think he is in the room. Is Mr. Davidge on the phone? Do we have anyone on the phone? Okay, then we'll come back to Mr. Davidge and hopefully he will be in attendance. So then we'll go ahead and move to Mr. Oliva.
Good morning, Ron Oliva, 49-year resident, adjacent property owner to the Brother Francis shelter. I gave you another packet. I gave this to all the assemblymen. The first thing is an invoice for $250,000 that the municipality shorted when they bought my 2 power company lots. They said they'd make it up after the first year by buying my other parcels. Unfortunately, that transaction didn't occur, and there were complications with the earnest money, which the next page shows that was going to be swept because I cut 2 trees in my driveway at beetle kill and split down the middle Mayday, got sued by the landowner, and because I'm a chemical terrorist and wealthy businessman and a real estate tycoon and also a former politician who didn't ever hold office, that plagiarized article and false article, I'm sure the jury had reviewed by what Mr. Dunbar does when he gets a call and they leave their name. He would Google them to check their background. Well, juries do that, and they were awarded $178,000. I appealed that because the attorneys were getting $675 an hour on 2 dead trees, spent 5 hours appealing it, and they spent 210 hours at $675 an hour and awarded an additional $87,000. Right now they sweat my accounts. For the last couple of years it's been real tough. I ran out of really cash and cash flow, so I need this money to pay those attorneys so I can carry on with my life. It's a dark cloud. So it's the lawsuit. And then I consider myself a homeless expert. There is not a humanitarian crisis. I think that's a real extreme labeling of this. And I don't know where you were when Berkowitz, we had 67 tons removed. I got on my PA They were bathing camps in 10 days, no porta potties, no water, but a 10-yard dumpster they were dumping honey buckets in and couldn't get it in and ended up wearing whatever was in the honey bucket. Sanitation, biological hazards after this pandemic. It was something that a level 4 sewage treatment plant operator tried to prevent. No one tried to poison anyone. It was to protect the vulnerable. And Kids Kitchen, where they make 1,200 to 1,500 meals a day. Remember, I got a year in jail for that, and that sentence is coming up. So I really need the money, and I haven't given up on my core beliefs. When people are in need, respond. And I responded. If you can see the donation list, you've asked for bottles, sunscreen, hats, and insect repellent.
Mr. Oliva.
Oh my God,
Yeah,
you didn't have the clock on.
Yeah, I had it on my phone.
Okay, do I get a bonus 30 seconds?
Unfortunately, that's not how it works. But
Really?
I do
Can you make an
appreciate you.
exception? Point of personal privilege.
If you have like a sentence or so to
A
add,
sentence.
sure.
Well,
If you have like a closing statement.
please give me my funds owed to me. And then also, I think it would be good that you buy that property. You wouldn't be in the pickle you are, because that property is adjacent to another navigational thing.
Thank
So
you.
that would be the biggest things.
Thank you, Mr. Oliva.
Okay. This is remote, long shot in the left field, but are there any questions?
I do not see any questions, Mr. Oliva.
You know, that really scares me because your minds are made up. And Mr. Constant said that 250,000 was out there.
Thank you.
Can you show me in writing where
Thank you,
that
Mr.
was?
Oliva. Your time is up. I just want to check. Do we have Mr. Davidge on the phone? Do we know? I didn't see him come in. No. Okay. All
Okay,
right,
I'll
then
take his
we'll go ahead
3
and.
minutes.
No. Sorry, Mr. Oliva. Thank you. We're going to
Write the
continue
check.
on with
I'll be
our
out of your hair.
meeting. Thank you. So for folks on the phone, if you want to get in the queue as we begin our the rest of our committee meeting and our discussion, please text me to get in the phone to get in the queue, and then members in person just wave me down and I'll put you in the queue. Okay, so first item on our agenda under business is overview of the plan to address the growing humanitarian crisis. So I have a little bit of introduction for this one. So last week, Assembly members Cameron Perez-Verdia, Daniel Voland, and myself introduced 2 resolutions to address the growing humanitarian crisis we all see on our streets. The plan we have brought forward is a logical offspring of the work of the facilitated process, which broke down in June, the Anchored Home Plan, the community's plan to end homelessness, and various other plans this body has deliberated over the last couple of years. The plan has 5 parts, 4 of which are addressed in the 2 resolutions that will be before the body on July 26th. One is $500,000 to remodel and immediately open up 60 scattered site rental units. 2, $2 million to forward fund emergency shelter for the upcoming winter, because winter is always around the corner. 3, $1.5 million for outreach services. 4, $3.4 million to complete capital funding for the guest house, opening up 130 new permanent supportive housing and workforce housing units. 5, $12.6 million to purchase another hotel to open up to 120 to 150 units, likely additional permanent supportive housing, workforce housing units. To assist us in understanding the synergistic nature of this plan and how it fits into the work to flesh and fill out our homeless prevention response system, I'm going to invite the director of the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness, Meg Zalatel, to come up and give us a general overview. Specific questions regarding the resolutions will be set aside for a work session that is calendared for this Friday at 9 a.m. So Friday, July 22nd, 9 a.m. at City Hall, room 155, so first floor conference room. So that is when we will have our opportunity to ask specific questions, but if members have general questions, this would be a good opportunity to ask those. So I'll turn it over to you, Ms. Alta.
Thank you. Good morning. Meg Zalatel, English Coalition and Homelessness. So I want to talk a little bit about the intersection of what we know now the funding requests around enhanced outreach, the additional units through the Landlord Housing Partnership, and the emergency sheltering funding, and how those intersect with what we're seeing in this moment. So I want to start with a little bit of a snapshot of June. In June, we saw a system inflow of only 98 people compared to 200 the previous month. We also saw an inactive, meaning folks we lose track of, jump from 192 to 223. And that's the direct result of not having the typical access points in the system. So previously, the Sullivan was capturing a lot of folks who were coming in looking for help. Brother Francis would capture folks who were coming in and looking for help. The Sullivan no longer exists as a mass care facility. It was using HMIS, even though it was a COVID response. Brother Francis has a wait list, but that wait list isn't captured in HMIS because that's not what HMIS is for. It's when someone enters a project. So if you take the constraints in the system and that there is nowhere for anyone to go, it puts outreach on the front lines of the response. And outreach is where we really do need to not only encounter individuals, see what their immediate needs are, but we need the opportunity to spend more time with them. We need larger outreach teams. We need to utilize HMIS in-street outreach in a more robust fashion. And that's really hard because we have very specific data quality and completeness standards. So that requires us to really center outreach back on the front lines instead of shelter. That is a new paradigm, or a renewed paradigm, perhaps. It really does go back to that housing first approach. We also need the ability, once we outreach someone, if they're not going to be able to move forward from shelter or go forward to shelter or directly to housing, because we're still not seeing movement in the system, we need to be able to do a lot of things we would typically have done when you're assigned a case manager at a shelter in the streets or in the encampments. That means layering on transportation. How do you get someone documents that they need in order to secure a lease if we can't transport them anywhere? How do we get people to see units? How do we do the things that we have often relied on shelters and shelter case management to do directly from the streets? So that is really that increased outreach request. It also encompasses families. We've never had to target families specifically for outreach, and we do now. We are seeing unsheltered families. We think we can put a stop to that pretty quick. And when I talk about emergency sheltering, I have some exciting things I want to share with you there. But I was also hearing from our outreach coordinator, folks are in cars. It is really hard to outreach people in cars. They move around. And it's also a different paradigm to approach someone in a car than someone in an encampment. So we really do want to center outreach as the front lines of the homeless prevention response. It's in line with what HUD is telling us we need to do as well. And so that is the impetus for that request. And frankly, 350 unsheltered individuals estimated require a more robust outreach approach. Turning to the emergency sheltering, this is really to start to plan for winter. Emergency sheltering is required in code. One of the triggers is 45 degrees. We're all kind of familiar with that. Temperature trigger, but also a declaration from the health department director, and the lack of an emergency sheltering plan, I think, has hindered us year over year moving into the winter, I think that there's a declaration still pending from the previous health director that there isn't adequate shelter due to COVID-19. I think it still stands. I provided a copy of that. So I think this is an opportunity. The current stressors on our system and the number of unsheltered folks really is the reason to buckle down and get this emergency sheltering plan in place. If we look to other jurisdictions, they're often tiered approaches. Tier 1 might be inclement weather that you can predict and you may, or that you know is coming, and you may ask your existing providers, can they increase capacity? And then you fund that increase in capacity. Tier 2 might be something like we stand up for the longer term in winter, where you're going to have to find another location to take in the additional capacity associated with something that you have an obligation to do. And tier 3 is often turning on city or state resources because it's a really big deal and it's more like COVID, but maybe not a FEMA response. So I think we have an opportunity to buckle down and write an emergency sheltering plan. I don't know of one that's existed in the municipality that's been written. And that is why we've asked for both the funding, but also we want to catalyze this in this moment. It's July, it's the end of July. So August, September, hopefully we can have that plan done, in place, any RFPs that need to go out for providers. So October 1, we're ready, and that we're planning through till the end of April, because that's our traditional emergency sheltering season in Anchorage, with a little give and take depending on the weather. For families, I specifically want to call out, we have had a great partnership with the church community again. So we're still working on the details, but we're really excited. We think we're going to be able to reactivate the churches with some assistance, some provider assistance, because we can't expect volunteers to do it all on their own. But I feel like we're starting to position ourselves where we could be moving into a posture where we could end family unsheltered homelessness in Anchorage. That is amazing, and that is a huge credit to this group that has been convening and problem solving this for the past couple of years. And part of that funding is to really get that up and running, and hopefully that could be something we could institute year round. So then turning to the lack of movement in the system. You look at the housing numbers, and we provided our slides to Mr. Rivera, and they're up on the committee's website, I believe, but you'll see a drop in the housing number. We've run out of units. And so what we do know is there are units that are uninhabitable right now. And as we work with landlords and they come through the landlord housing partnership, they're willing to make them habitable to rent to people experiencing homelessness, but we need the funds to do that. Right now, the current project doesn't contemplate 2 and 3 bedroom units. There's a need for those. It's really more 1 bedroom and studios. And so this would expand. We've already identified 30 units. These 30 units could likely be rehabbed and ready to go before winter. So it would create movement in the system, which I think is really important. And it really doesn't stand anything new up. It expands an existing project and program we're having great success with. It also lets us leverage things like Anchorage Housing Finance Corporation, housing stability and rental assistance. It could let us leverage emergency housing vouchers. So there's other leverage points for that funding. Really what we're trying to show you is a way forward to make some movement in the system, address the immediate needs, and acknowledge that there isn't any shelter capacity right now without some direct intervention. And that direct intervention really falls to you all, the city, because there's an emergency sheltering plan that's required. We're here to be partners in that and want to help with that, but that's what we're seeing. I did want to point out 2 key things.
Actually, before you move on, sorry, a member did want to ask a question on your last immediate point, Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this goes to the plan that you and our 2 colleagues have put forward too. So on the 60 remodeled units, you said you've already identified 30. Can you describe where they are, or if the owners don't want to, can you describe sort of what kind of units? Are they in fourplexes? Are they in larger apartment complexes? Where are these units?
I can get you that information. Typically, Ms. Ware would be here, and she is intimately acquainted with each of those units, but she is out of state today. But I'd have to follow up on that.
Do you have any sense of what part of town they are concentrated in, or is it scattered?
My understanding is it's scattered, and that we work with landlords all over, the Landlord Housing Partnership works with landlords all over the city to identify when they have a unit and they're willing to rent, and they leverage their incentives, these rehab dollars, et cetera.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The last thing I just wanted to add was that we do have the complex care capacity, and it's nearly full. And then there is the transitional housing at the guest house. Neither of those are housing right now in this moment. So the over 130 people at the guest house are still in a status of experiencing homelessness because they are in a transitional housing environment. That still meets the definition of homelessness under HUD. When that hopefully closes and those folks lease up, they will move into that housing project and we will see that success. And we will see it reflected in our numbers, but I just wanted to let you know that until it's done and those leases are signed, we don't exit people from homelessness. And similarly, those that are at the complex care facility are still experiencing homelessness. We're happy they're getting a level of care and they're safe, but they're still experiencing homelessness. This is not their final destination. And in fact, we're often looking for assisted living home placements and trying to leverage Medicaid waiver services and other resources to support them. Thanks.
Great, thank you. All right, so we're going to go ahead and open it up for any questions. So are there any members who want to get in the queue? All right, not seeing any. I will go ahead and just provide a quick comment then to close this off before we move on to the next item on our agenda. So of all of the different aspects that the coalition has really honed in on, for me, I think one of the most exciting ones is the idea of the emergency shelter plan, and particularly forward funding and forward planning the plan. Because in the past, sort of regardless of the administration, the municipality has had to beg and plead a provider to fill the need for emergency shelter. And thankfully, we have had organizations who have been willing to step up, even though it wasn't part of their plan, and provide that emergency sheltering in the past. But the idea of really having a truly coordinated plan, I think, is an exciting one, and hopefully that will help alleviate the stress in the system every winter that happens. So not seeing anyone in the queue, then we're going to go ahead and move on to the review of the draft HUD action plan. So every year the municipality receives funding through HUD that is approved by this body through the HUD action plan. This plan should be coming to the body within the next month or so. Hopefully the administration can provide those specific details if they have them. In advance of this, I just wanted to give the Anchorage Health Department or the administration, whoever is representing the health department today, who manages these funds, a chance to review the draft HUD action plan, which is available on the department's website. In addition, members should have received a letter from the coalition providing their comments on the plan, and the coalition is here to answer any questions members may have on their letter. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to whoever from the administration will be speaking on this topic.
I have Joe Durace, the health director, on the phone.
Great. Welcome, Mr. Durace. While we're getting Mr. Durace online, just for the members of the public who are either in person or listening on the phone, I believe there are only two documents for this committee meeting. First is the letter from the coalition, which is on the committee's website, as well as the slideshow from the coalition, which they did not present today, but it is part of the normal monthly updates. So if members of the public want to review those, you can look at those on our website. So for members on the phone wondering why the silence, we are just waiting to get Mr. Gervais online, and then we will continue the meeting shortly.
Are you hearing me now?
Great.
Can you hear me? This is Joe.
You're a little bit soft, but I think we'll handle the volume on our end. So go ahead, Mr. Gervais. Welcome.
Thank you, sir. Sorry about that. I spoke for a minute. As you referenced, sir, the action plan is available for review from folks. Additionally, we are still accepting some comments. And then as the coalition referenced, they recently provided a letter with some, with some of their clarifying moments around the current action plan. So I'm wondering if you'd like me just to speak to the high level of what the action plan involves. Where people have specifics, I'd be glad to. I think there's some specific questions around the action plan and some desired action. So I defer to this group. I know we're short on time. I don't want to go to a rambling answer that doesn't answer the real burning question, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Gervais. If you can go ahead and just start with a basic overview of the HUD action, the draft HUD action plan, and some of the hopes that the health department, some of the things the health department hopes to achieve with the usage of the funds this year.
Well, the first answer is we had several funds inside of the HUD action plan. And so whether it be community development block grants, whether it be home investment items or emergency solution grants, it really just depends on which fund source we're referring to. But we have quite a lot of programs that we work with community partners. These are not funds that we personally use. There's an administrative piece, but what we do with these, for instance, we have a project with WorldCap under CEG, the Community Development Block Grants, for fixing people that are in mobile homes so they don't lose that affordable housing they have available. We have funds in that program to help people stay in their home if they need handicap accessibility created in their current home so they're not displaced. So there's a wide range of projects that these funds are used for to accommodate folks to continue to live their life in housing. So most of it goes to support lower income persons or families. So that program, for instance, is a $1.8 million program that we're talking about. That would be the CDBG funds. That's one piece of it. There may be emergency solutions grant piece that provides a lot of the programs that people are aware of. That might be from preventing homeless families to a lot of those funds are used around supporting those to help operate shelters, provide individuals that are experiencing homelessness a route forward. Rapid rehousing, for instance, is another option under the ESG, the emergency solutions piece of the HUD action plan. But we are partnered with Habitat for Humanity, we're partnered with NeighborWorks, we're partnered with WorldCap, and when I say we, through the coalition and the CFC concept, this is an active piece of that. So in the general overview of the program, we take this community feedback, and then there will be the plan we see, there will be actual public discussions where people can say yes or no, that's the route they feel we ought to go in the community. But that's a required piece of the HUD program that we go out to the community and get their feedback, particularly community partners, through our partners in the CFC. And I'll pause there without going too far.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Gervais? I guess I have one specific question before I ask the coalition to come up and provide any comments that they might have. So of the various components, whether it's the CDBG, home, or ESG funds, can you just give a brief synopsis of any of the funds that are being used for unit acquisition to increase our housing stock of affordable housing units?
Well, there's a proposal to use the money, but currently, the answer to that, I guess that's a hard answer. So I feel that, through the support of WorldCap and the mobile home
Thank you. I guess since you brought that up, what is the quickest timeline to be able to actually access those funds?
Once we have an application from the intended recipient, which we do not have at this time, I would say that they would be by year end. It depends on the comments that we received. If we receive minor or major objections, some of those items come into play. It's not quite as a simple answer as that, but I would say mid-December would be my best guess, depending on when we get the application and the process starts running.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and invite the coalition to come up. And the coalition did send us a letter with some comments, many of them supportive of the various aspects of the HUD action plan. So if you want to speak to it, that would be wonderful.
Thank you. Meg Zalatel, Anchorage Coalition in Homelessness. So I think it's important to know that this is the 5th year of a 5-year action plan, and the total funding amongst the ESG, home, and CDBG funds is just over $2.8 million. Really, our focus as the COC is how, as a COC lead agency, is how do we ensure that these funds are braided with other funding sources to effectuate the solution to homelessness, which is housing. So we detailed per fund source, comments on what we thought were the most pressing or relevant projects. So for instance, there's definitely under CDBG, the idea of adding units, but it's a TBD project. So that means that a particular project has not yet been identified. And that's fine. We just want to reiterate both the urgency in needing the projects to be identified as well, because those things take time to go through the CDBG funding or any HUD funding process takes time. So we just wanted to encourage the health department to work on identifying those projects. And then also to consider how to braid in or leverage other funding with that potential project that they may identify, particularly to support permanent supportive housing units, whether as a standalone or portion of the project. The same is true for the HUD. I'm sorry, before I move on from CDBG, there's 2 case management projects identified. We're in desperate need of case management, so any support of case management is always welcome. The home, similarly, some sort of unit acquisition or development is identified. The same comments. How do we leverage, how do we expedite, and how do we incorporate permanent supportive housing in that project in some instance. And then there is a rental assistance through NeighborWorks that's identified. I think that that's going to be really critical. A lot of rental assistance is ending, as we know. Rental assistance can be used as a rapid rehousing tool, but we do want to make sure it's leveraged with any other rental assistance projects or that it doesn't duplicate, particularly AHFC's current rental assistance project. The one I am really excited about, frankly, is the ESG funding to Adrc. We have been working with folks with more complex needs. Adrc has been an amazing partner in our case conferencing and person-centered intakes to really get folks on the path to Medicaid waivers and placements in assisted living homes, and they're having great success. It's not a quick process, but it's a necessary one, and they're doing really great work to assist individuals who would otherwise remain in homelessness for a longer period of time. In closing, I really just want to turn your attention to kind of the last paragraph we have there, which is really the list of all the different things that this funding could be leveraged against. And really thinking holistically about how all of these funding streams should work together to achieve those housing first goals. Because I think that is what we've been missing as a system for a really long time. It's feedback we also hear from philanthropy and other funders is what are you doing to braid the various funding sources and resources to get basically the biggest bang for each buck. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, I'll go ahead and pause, see if there are any questions. Okay, I have 2 questions then. So first, and both of them are for you, Mr. Gervais, and again, thank you for attending to respond to these. So first is the two sort of TBD projects that the coalition identified, and for folks who have the HUD action plan in front of you, it's page 46 of the HUD action plan, or page 36 as they have numbered it. Could you just let me know a little bit about the process to flesh out those TBD projects, and especially considering our need to get additional units online? I'm very curious to learn the process that the health department is taking. Thank you.
Yes, sir. So there's several TBD projects under the CDBG projects. We have $821,000. Is that the project you're referring to, sir? Just for full clarity.
Yes, it would be 821 from CDBG and then home 411.
Right, so that one's a great example. What we do is we're going to meet with community partners, and we identify potential acquisitions with that fund stream, and then we would then take those suggestions from the community, and we would vet them to make sure they comply with the requirements around CDBG, because sometimes the project looks great, but there may be struggle with that location based on whether it be an LMI, whether it be a social justice kind of issue. We're going to look at the totality of the project. We've had these meetings, and there has to be there's a lot of steps that are involved. One of them is, for instance, we have to make sure that there wasn't another funding stream available to them, or that they're not, using great funding. Absolutely, like Director Zalatel said, but we also have to make sure that there's certain requirements that come on the back end. For instance, life of the structure operating inside of it. So, it's not as simple as just saying it's a great project. It's a great project, and then we start the due diligence piece, where we start looking at some things. We have quite a lot of community partners that have presented many, many viable projects, and then we get into the meat and potatoes and trying to analyze it. And it's not about analyzing best bang for the buck. It's about making sure that we're compliant with all the other requirements. Particularly, for instance, there's a 10-year, 15-year rule sometimes that kicks in. It has to have a life like that, so it can't be something that's stood up for a very short term or that's going to transition. So we look to make sure that they're going to be compliant with the CDBG after we make sure that there's no obstructions to it. Like I said, LMI is a big one, and that social justice piece that comes with that. A lot of times these projects are outstanding, but then we see that they're concentrated maybe 2 blocks from another project. That in and of itself creates some complexity for using the CDBG funds. But, if there was a specific project, we would just do the substantial amendment piece and make sure that we rapidly process that substantial amendment and got them the support they needed for their project.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that process. Then I guess last question I had, just a brief response is fine. So what's the next steps before approval of this? When are you expecting this to come before the assembly, and are there any future public hearings?
Sorry, I'm having a little hard time hearing. Were you asking what the rough timeline is for this to be wrapped up and brought before you?
Correct.
Simple answer would be mid-August would be my best guess sitting here today, barring any, major concerns presented by the community. But we should see to you guys mid-August, so about a month away, sir.
Okay, thank you. Next I have Mr. Salt.
Mr. Chair, so this question is probably for Director Zalatel, so I don't know if it's a good time to ask her or if you can answer it. I get the question from constituents, why am I always being asked to pay for this? And I'm a big fan of 50-50 grants where the organization has to raise 50% of the funds. Is it possible, whether now or where we get information on the fundraising that the various nonprofits are receiving from other sources outside of the community? It might help to ease citizens' minds that, hey, this isn't all coming at the burden of the community and your taxes, that these organizations are out raising funds on their own. If that's clear enough. Thanks.
Thank you for the question. So you've hit on a salient thing for a lot of these projects is they have very diverse fund stacks. The HUD funding from the participating jurisdiction or the municipality is not enough to make any of these projects fully go, particularly those around new units of housing. We saw even in the instance of the complex care shelter, both the acquisition fund stack was a variety of sources, but the operating fund stack for that project was a combination of funding sources that included philanthropy, one-time federal HUD money, alcohol tax money, as well as hopefully, a prediction of maybe some Medicaid payback. So each one of these projects often has 3, 4, 7, 8 funding sources. It is why we stress in our letter that we really need to make sure we're leveraging all of the potential funding opportunities.
Great, thank you. And just a suggestion, I'm sure you're doing it, it's always good to share that information. And I've seen it a few times on the different fund stacks, so appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, not seeing anyone else in the queue, we'll go ahead and move on to the next topic on our agenda, which is update on the Navigation Center. I'll go ahead and turn over to the administration to provide the initial update, and then we'll see what questions we have.
Hello, this is Saxon Shear. I'm the project manager of the Navigation Center project. I'm also the director of maintenance and operations. Permitting first on the Navigation Center, we approached 65% design in early July. Permitting consists of the big top ones right now are the conditional use permit, the wetlands permit, and then most recently, I believe 2 days ago, we submitted the fill and grade permit to Developmental Services at MOA. Conditional use permit consists of really a review by the MOA departments sent to DOT, AWU, and utilities, other utilities such as NSTAR, GH, for their comments. The review comments become part of the staff packets and can be the basis of conditions of approval that are recommended by the planning staff. When that staff gets that consolidated packet, then they can make a more accurate decision based off the information provided. And this is an accumulation of all the listening sessions, community council meetings, and everything that's kind of led to this point. The wetlands permit was submitted, I believe we submitted that June 10th to the Corps of Engineers, and we expect their determination fairly soon. That's important because that determines how soon we can disturb the grounds. One of the big drivers of the project, to get ahead of the building, to prep the site of all the vegetation, bring in the non-processable fill and compact and prep, bring in the utilities and pour the slab so we can erect the building. We can't touch the ground until we have the wetland permit. So that's a big driver of the project. We want to be ready. The building has, obviously been ordered as we've talked about in past meetings. So we want to be as proactive as we can for multiple reasons. There is the need piece, which really drives this project. We really respect the need to get this going. But the cost, to keep control of the cost, we have to avoid cold weather construction. And so we're really trying to take advantage of anything we can do now to avoid cold weather construction. Again, that speaks on the budget. That will come with our 95% design. That's due right now, August 7th. So we're looking forward to seeing the 95% design. Everything comes as a packet, the schedule, the budget, and the design. We have a guaranteed maximum price already set, so as we become comfortable with the design, such as the building, with all the meeting with the developmental services and all the other departments, we become comfortable with the design, knowing that it will meet the requirements of code. That's what develops a comfort when we can sign off an order such a package. So we've already authorized the purchase that's en route. Some details that might be interesting to the group. I know the assembly and the mayor agreed to shorten the building to 27,000 square feet, well, 27 and change. That was exciting for more than one reason because we found some cost savings there. When those kind of decisions are made, it's helpful to help our project meet budget as much as we can. And, but then there's other factors that also counteract those savings, such as a decision with developmental services and the snow shed, snow load of the structure. So these structures have this package is a standard package, a width between the beams that hold the membrane. It was standard 16 feet. With the engineers from developmental services and our design team engineers, we argued back and forth what met code. And as a result, to meet the developmental services requirements with MOA, we had to install more frequent structural beams. It's an 8x11 aluminum beam that arcs over the top that helps sure up the snow load capability, and it adds to a seismic stability. Essentially, we've over-engineered the building, but we also meet the code. And so it's the equivalent, my point that I'm trying to make is the savings that we thought we were going to get from shortening the building from the 29,000 square feet to 27,000 square feet was pretty much a wash after we had to increase the cost for more structural strength of the building to meet the code. So a lot of those kind of conversations go on to make sure that we meet all the requirements. But nonetheless, it's been a good intent. The geotech came back pretty good that we don't have water at our level of the excavation where we're backfilling the grade. So we're hoping to save money there from dewatering. We're also able to delete helical pile feature work, which is like a $230,000 feature work. We'll have to beef up the foundation to counteract the deletion of the helical piles. But a lot of good savings there to speak on as we try to dial in the 95% design budget. Schedule, again, we're trying to break ground as soon as possible, as soon as we get that wetland permit from the Corps of Engineers. Looking forward to breaking ground. I would say roughly right now, August 20 would be a good placeholder. Again, we would break ground, backfill up to the elevation that is designed, bringing utilities and pour the slab in advance of the building arriving. A building is, right now our placeholder is September 20th for the building to arrive. And I believe, right now we're looking at probably end of January with a bow tie, on the project, all deficiencies, punch list items, end of January to close out the project. We're looking at hopefully before Thanksgiving for a partial occupancy, if we can get half the building substantially complete and help with the need. I think that's a high level view. Are there any questions?
Thanks. I have a few folks in the queue, starting with Ms. Allard.
Thank you, Felix. Actually, it was to circle back around what Mr. Solti had said earlier. I don't know if you want me to wait.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and come back to you, Ms. Allard. I'll put you back in the queue for once we're done with this discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. A couple of questions. First, would the significant engineering upgrades, including the aluminum bracing, have been required on the larger structure?
Yes.
So it's not that we had a wash, but really it seems like we had as a previous plan that didn't fully account for the costs.
I think it's hindsight is 2020. Now looking at what it could have been a very different determination, and we could have argued otherwise with the specific engineer. But to align with what I think we all want, we want a safe facility for those that will benefit from this. We could argue otherwise, and I feel confident we could. But we want a safe facility for those that will benefit from its use.
Yeah, I was accused of slandering or somehow maligning Sprung Tents when I said their tent as designed did not meet the structural requirements of the code. And so those tents have come home to roost. Second question, I understand we appropriated funding for the project, but I didn't see any authorization to make the purchase. And I know our appropriations work in two steps. One is we put the funds on the table, and then the second is we authorize the purchase. In particular, for a purchase that's multiple millions of dollars, do we have an actual authorization to make that purchase? Or was that just something that was done by the administration because time was of the essence?
That was a pretty cumbersome process. I'm pretty confident in the process we did because it involved, I believe, Michelle, there was a contribution from the Rasmussen. I'll defer to anything else.
Thank you. Actually, the Assembly did approve a $4 million appropriation at ACF, if you remember, the Alaska Community Foundation. And it was a three-partner, 3 people had to agree. I represent the municipality, and any expenditures that came out of that appropriation, that it was held in trust through ACF. Felix was the other one who had to agree, and Michelle Brown, I believe, was the one on behalf of the Rasmussen appropriation. So the actual expenditure for the facility was made through ACF.
So the sprung tent was paid for in part by philanthropy?
No. Again, the Assembly appropriated $4 million to the Alaska Community Foundation, and it takes 3 entities, basically 3 individuals representing. Felix is one, Michelle Brown is representing Rasmussen, and then I represent the municipality. All 3 had to agree on the appropriations over $500. Out of that money that the Assembly appropriated to ACF, the structure was purchased through cooperative agreement.
So, Mr. Rivera, as I understood, the money that we put into that account was actually for the purchase of brick and mortar. So, was there a change along the way that allowed a tent structure to be purchased with those dollars? This is news to me.
So, I guess just a couple clarifying points. First is this vote of the 3 parties happened several months ago. I don't even remember an exact date. It was so long ago. And then second is, my recollection of the resolution states that the funding that we provided was for the purchase of the shell, and that is what the Assembly approved to go into the Community Foundation Fund.
Interesting. Look forward to seeing those documents.
All right, Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What you said was interesting. I mean, the vote was several months ago. I think May was when we took the vote to approve the funds for this particular project. I guess those were additional funds, so there were already monies in the Community Foundation. Okay. My question for the administration, I don't think this is your realm, Saxon, so anyone else at the administration. What steps have we taken and what progress have we made to turn the Golden Lion on as a treatment facility?
Through the chair, Mr. Dunbar, Alexis Johnson, Chief of Staff. Right now, we have an opportunity to turn on treatment beds in the near future with Salvation Army at 660, and that has been our main focus. Treatment has been the mayor's priority, and so therefore the alligator closest to the boat has been 660, and that's been our priority.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is you have not made an effort to turn on the Golden Lion as a treatment facility, but instead are going forward with a facility with Salvation Army at 660. Is that correct?
Through the chair, Mr. Dunbar, the goal has always been treatment, and so the quickest and easiest treatment to turn on at this facility is 660, and that's our priority as of right now.
Does the mayor intend to turn on the Golden Lion as a treatment facility?
Through the chair, Mr. Dunbar, I think that the priority has always been treatment, and if it does seem like a feasible option, that's something that is being discussed. I don't see a reason why it wouldn't be explored, but as of right now, our treatment priority has been with 660. Thank you.
My question now to you, Mr. Rivera. So, you and Mr. Boland as well. I take from the mayor's, from the chief of staff's answer that they have not made a good faith effort to turn on the Golden Lion, which means that the money that we set aside for this navigation center is no longer valid. And that was it was contingent on that. And so, do you intend, as part of this plan that you're bringing forward, to purchase the facilities and renovate the place and generally get us the beds we need to exit Centennial, do you intend to reappropriate the money, the $6 million that we had passed for the navigation center contingent on the Golden Line?
So the two laid on the table resolutions that were put forward by myself, Member Voland, and Member Perez-Verde relied on two funding sources. One was alcohol tax funds, and the second was ARPA 2 funds. So at this time, we haven't had any discussions on using other funding sources. Frankly, if there is another funding source that comes up, then I would want to use that funding source to do even more than what we are planning right now. So that is my response to that question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I ask Mr. Ballin if you guys have any further thoughts on that?
I echo what Felix said, and I do think that'll be part of a bigger conversation. Yeah, we need units.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right, so I have myself in the queue next. Okay, so I guess I'm going to ask some of the questions that Mr. Dunbar asked, but in a perhaps a slightly different way. So when does the administration plan on beginning the exploration that was we started to consider in the facilitated process on the entire substance misuse treatment system, and in particular how the Golden Lane might fit into that system? Has the administration started that process, and if not, when is the administration actually going to start that process?
Through the chair to Mr. Rivera, those conversations have already started. We are exploring all options right now to include the Golden Line. As far as treatment, I do want to reiterate that our priority is getting 660 online and turning on 86 treatment beds. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I guess my only comments there is, I would certainly hope the administration could do both at the same time, because we need more treatment beds. But I appreciate that response. Okay, so the next is, you spoke a lot to some of the more technical construction-related, permitting-related aspects of the Navigation Center, but I have not heard any updates on some of the operational sides of things. Has the administration been attending the two communities of practice as it committed it would?
Through the chair, the community of practice meetings that we are having on Mondays, I think ended for a little while. I can definitely get with Ms. Ware with ACH and continue that.
Okay, so can you just, for the record, when was the last meeting that you attended of the community of practice? When was the last one held?
If you could just give me 1 second to check my calendar.
Sure.
So it looks like May 31st.
Okay, so May 31st was the last meeting of the community of practice. Now, there are two communities of practice, or there were supposed to be, as I understood it. One for the Navigation Center and one for the Low Barrier Shelter. This May 31st meeting was for which one of those two? No, you're not muted.
Through the chair, it appears it was the Low Barrier Shelters.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so then, I don't know if you can put a percentage or any other type of measure on it, but how far along is the administration in developing any type of operational plans for either the Low Barrier Shelter or for the Navigation Center?
Through the chair, it still remains a priority, I would say, is we're not very far along, but it does remain a priority.
Okay, thank you. Next in the queue, I have Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a couple of questions. And we're waiting for the Salvation Army facility to be remodeled. And I'm wondering how far along is that work at this point in time? Do we have an estimate of when that facility will be complete and operational? Thank you.
Through the chair, Mr. Peterson, I was told that funding was the main issue with turning it on and that it will be turned on by the end of the year.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, I don't see anyone else in the queue. So I'll go ahead and go back to you, Ms. Allard, for your comments before we move on to the last item on our agenda.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. So my comment was in regards to Mr. Schulte. He brought up the fact that how the nonprofits are raising money, and I commend the nonprofits for raising money, but the cheap part of raising the funds to purchase buildings is one thing. The ongoing operation is heavily expensive and the burden of the taxpayers. And I'd like to encourage you, maybe we'll come up with a solution for this, but to change roles. What I mean by that is that purchasing a building, I think more of us can get behind that process. But for the ongoing operations, that's where I think the nonprofits need to step in, pay for those themselves, because they control the funds in the aspect that they'll stay within a better budget line. That includes income, salaries, input, electricity, and other expenditures for operations that they probably normally wouldn't be keen to keeping at a low cost if the taxpayers are paying for it. So I want to come back and reevaluate that so we can switch roles on that, and then we can get behind possibly purchasing the building, but the nonprofits have to be responsible for the operation. Thank you, Chair. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
So I was going to speak to that when Mr. Salt mentioned it before, but I decided not to just because I feel like it might be a bit of a sidetrack to our conversation today, but since it was now brought up, I would argue just the opposite of what I heard just now, in the sense that we have 45 or 50 or more years of history where I can show you report after report of failures of this local government and our state government to address issues of ongoing homelessness. And what the problem always came back to was that the government never had any stake in the game of the operation and always left it to the goodwill and charity of members of the community to figure this out. And in the end, there is a level of this process that the municipality and even the state has some liability for, and it's not just the bricks and mortar. The bricks and mortar are, as Ms. Allard said, actually the easy part, that we can almost always find money to build or buy a building. The problem always comes in when it is time to figure out how to operate it. And so while Mr. Salt, you argued, I think that 50-50 split might be fair, even that I think is difficult when we're talking about establishing a permanent, effective system. But I think the municipality and the state really have a burden to take care of some of this business. So, and we can sort the fine details of that in the future, but know that we did many, many, many years of let's have philanthropy and the government build buildings and leave it to charity to figure out the difference. And that's what created the system that we've been working now for some 7 years to get away from.
Thank you. And it's an interesting discussion, and hopefully one that we can get into more in the future. For now, I just want to say thank you to all of the partners in the room who provide your dollars and do all of the fundraising to help make this happen. So next, we're going to go on to the update on the Centennial Park Campground. So I'll go ahead and start with the administration to see if they have any update, and then we'll go to questions from members.
Mike Braniff with Parks and Recreation with Centennial Campground updates. So Parks and Rec is now 3.5 weeks into having created a legal camping option, and we've done that by waiving the fee. Word spread quickly, and we arrived at approximately 180 people in roughly a week. We've plateaued at that number and continue to hover around there. The best numbers, taking a census is challenging. The best numbers we have is actually feedback we get from Beans Cafe. They know how many meals they hand out the window of their truck each day. We know that 58 of the individuals came from the Sullivan Arena. We know that per AHD. 41 of them were transported by AHD, and the remaining 17 had made their way over themselves. The balance of the 180, which is 120 or so individuals, they came from other camps, which would be illegal camps around Anchorage. We see the difference. We see the reduced populations in areas such as Davis Park and the Chester Creek Trail Corridor around the Chester Creek Sports Complex. Let's see, we continue to work with Fish and Game on preventative measures to make campers bear safe as possible. Yesterday, another 130 bear-proof containers were provided. Our staff makes regular rounds every hour on the hour to clean up food-related trash, observe how individuals are storing their food, and just communicating bear safe practices and campground rules. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, I'm sorry, is Mr. Braniff's the only presentation, or are there any other presentations from the administration on Centennial Park before I start asking questions?
I will ask. Okay, I'm getting notes.
Okay. So the first, I was there yesterday and spoke with some of the advocates there, and they felt that there were well over 200. They said closer to 300 people. But you're saying it was 180 and it's plateaued there. So how updated are those numbers? Why do you think the perception of the advocates sort of at that central hub is that so many more? And what exact data are you getting from Beats Cafe?
Sure. Really, I think that number 300 has simply been misreported. And I think that people have heard what's been reported and repeated it back. It becomes a part of the narrative. It's challenging to take a census. It's really challenging to get everybody in the same place at the same time and account for each individual. And frankly, it's so populous that in some instances, some individuals are hesitant to even mention their name. So, taking a census under those conditions is challenging. But, Beans, we're in regular conversation with, and we know how many plates, go out at each meal. So, but they know and provide that to us.
Okay. Can I ask some more questions, Mr. Chair? And this might be for you, Mike, or perhaps somebody else. So we know there's been one overdose death so far, but that was part of a broader overdose incident where some people were revived. How many total overdoses have we had since it opened, and certainly since the last overdose death?
I'll take that question. So in general, the Anchorage Fire Department does not release HIPAA-related information when it comes to medical transports. But I will say the Anchorage Fire Department, as of yesterday morning, Chief Strongeen informed me that AFD since June 24th had only been to the Centennial Campground 13 times in total, and that could be for a variety of reasons. Again, AFD, because of HIPAA-related issues, doesn't talk about specific medical needs and ambulance transports. I would just point out overdoses happen all across the community. They can happen in your neighbor's house. They can happen at the Diamond Center. They can happen anywhere. So again, we just don't talk about personal medical information, but the response to Centennial Campground since the 13th as of yesterday had only been 13 AFD calls, and again, that could be for a variety of reasons.
All right, one more question, I know you got people in the queue. We know there's been, and so I'm not talking about personal, identifying information, but this is a municipal facility where we get reports of different activities like OTs, so we know kind of the overall statistics. We know there's been at least one sexual assault in the campground. There have been a number of police calls. What are the sort of, how many, that's only one that I have heard through reports from advocates. So how many sexual assaults have there been in the camps? How many other violent crimes have there been in the camps at all? What is the total number of police calls since the last time you were updated by the chief of police?
Through the chair, Mr. Dunbar, I'd be happy to get the information from you for a number of APD calls to the campground. I don't have that information with me today, but I certainly can get that number for you. I'll just get any specific information I can get from APD that they feel comfortable releasing. I'm happy to do that for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Schultz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, question for Mike. So I did ask a question earlier about opioid kits, and I have that information, which I appreciate. Thank you. So, two questions. One, I get a lot of comments about the capacity of the park and concerns about restrooms and showers. So, I'd like to know what the capacity of the park is and any supplemental resources you brought to bear. And then, just in relation to get the data on APD callouts, do we have a feel to how the park is operating compared to how the Sullivan operated? Is it better or worse? Probably growth measures like that. Thank you.
So by our own campground rules, where we allow 6 people per space and the 84 spaces plus the 2 large group areas, we would have a maximum of approximately 550 people by our own rules as the ceiling. We have not yet determined what maximum capacity is for this operation. We certainly don't envision it to be in the 550 range. I think it's important that people have enough elbow room, just have a peaceful, tranquil place to camp. In terms of the contrast between the campground and the Sullivan Arena, I can't comment on that. I wasn't involved with the Sullivan Arena.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Okay, yeah, I think that it's a very difficult question to try to compare the Sullivan Arena and the encampment that we sent people to, or we continue to send people to. I wonder how many people at the Sullivan Arena had to have their feet in inches of mud, or how many times a bear inside the Sullivan Arena had to be chased off to protect the safety of the people within. And so, while it might be an interesting exercise to draw, compare, and contrast to calls for service for X, Y, or Z, I think that the dynamics are so substantially different between a place that has 4 walls, a roof, and basic safety to a place that's an open air free-for-all that may be, according to your media source, a really great place, or according to others, a humanitarian crisis. Somewhere in between those 2 points is the reality.
Mr. Dunbar?
Mike, could you remind me how many of these slots are traditionally RV slots?
Half.
And so I guess when we're talking about max capacity, yes, you could have 6 people per slot, but typically RVs have their own restrooms. And so we have 12 showers, right? And a certain number of toilets. And so I would hope that 550 number, they would be nowhere near that kind of capacity. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. I think that's an important note. We know that we're not going to approach that 550 number because it's not going to look the same when we don't have people in RVs.
So this is not a question for you, Mike, but for the rest of the administration. What's your plan for getting people out of Centennial Campground, and how long is it going to take?
Through the chair, Mr. Dunbar, as of right now, we are exploring winter sheltering options. We do not have plans to keep people at Centennial or to allow people to camp through winter. So our priority now is to focus on what the winter plan looks like.
As a follow-up question, Mr. Chair. For your own purposes, when does winter start?
Through the chair to Mr. Dunbar, we received a letter from ACH, and they had requested that we cease operations by September 30th. So we're hoping in between September to October.
So is it the administration's current intention to continue operating Centennial Campground as a part of the homelessness response, or however you want to define it, have a large concentration of people experiencing homelessness in Centennial Campground until at least September 30th?
Through the chair to Mr. Dunbar, our priority remains housing people and sheltering people and trying to get people to adequate shelter options. That remains our priority.
Do you anticipate that Centennial Campground will be used in its current configuration through September 30th?
Through the chair to Mr. Dunbar, with shelter capacity at its max right now, we believe that camping will continue at Centennial Campground.
Until when exactly?
Through the chair, I would say the end of September, early October. We have no plans to continue Centennial Campground through the winter. We will be shifting to emergency winter operations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So I'm in the queue, have a couple of questions, and then I see some other folks in the queue. So first is, I appreciate from Ms. Johnson, speaking of the emergency shelter winter plan. Does the administration, I guess, who will be leading the creation of that plan from the administration's perspective?
Through the chair, we actually have a meeting today to discuss it at 2:30. It's going to be all hands on deck, municipal manager, health department, Parks and Rec, chief of staff.
And as one part of the continuum of care, how does the administration foresee partnering with all of the other community partners to create the emergency shelter winter plan?
Through the chair, I'm always open. You can always call my cell phone or my email. I'm always open to collaborate and make this better for everybody.
Thanks. And then I guess to Ms. Zolotel, the chief of staff mentions a letter. Could you just expand on that a little bit?
Sure, thank you. So the letter we've actually sent two with regards to Centennial. One was outlining best practices from HUD for inclusive public spaces, acknowledging how to manage encampments or authorized camping. The second was, if first and foremost, our recommendation is site control is needed by a provider there, and we offered a unique alternative, which was to rent the campground to a provider so that they could have site control, and we recommended that that not last any longer than September 30th. In no way did that letter talk about the intersection of emergency sheltering obligations related to temperature. We just picked a date, kind of what we plan emergency sheltering around. However, if the 45 degrees drops, and we were looking at the weather just now, I think the emergency sheltering obligation may kick in before September with this cold, wet weather.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Zolotel. I guess that takes me back to the chief of staff. So what is the role of Salvation Army in all of this?
Through the chair, Salvation Army has stepped up to be the client care coordinator. So they are coordinating feeding campers, they are coordinating client outreach, and then they are also coordinating donations.
Are they, I guess one last question before I go back through the queue, are they coordinating entry or exit, or is that a responsibility of the municipality?
I'm not sure I have an answer for you on that. I can get that for you and get it to you in probably a couple minutes.
Thank you. So next I'm going to go to Mr. Voland.
Yeah, that was kind of my question, but I might like a little more information on why Salvation Army was chosen, and are we renting the campground to them, or are we just kind of turning over control to them? Are we paying them anything? I think the public has been asking a lot about that.
No worries, through the chair to Mr. Boland. Salvation Army actually approached us and said, hey, we see a need, we'd like to fill it. We were happy to oblige. As far as control of the campground, that still remains with Parks and Rec as it is a campground. And no, what was the third question? I'm sorry.
Are we funding them in any ways? Some people have been asking.
No.
Right.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Apologies. The administration's plan to continue operating Centennial Campground as a place where people experiencing homelessness until September 30th. Is that contingent on the Assembly passing the Parks Director-related ordinance on July 26th?
Through the chair, Mr. Dunbar, I just want to say that this is not a homelessness response, and this is the thing that we put forward to the Assembly. It just waives the camping limit, and that's given over to the Parks and Rec Director.
So if we do not pass that ordinance on July 26th, will it have any impact on people experiencing homelessness currently staying at Centennial Campground?
Under Martin versus Boise, we will not be able to abate the people at Centennial Campground until adequate shelter capacity is engaged.
Okay, so the legal position of the administration is similar to people that are camping in parks. This facility, should we not pass that ordinance, this facility also will not be the kind of place that we can trespass people or remove people or shift them out because of Martin v. Boise. So essentially this campground becomes like our other green spaces and folks cannot be abated out of that camp. Is that correct?
Through the chair, Mr. Dunbar, I just want to be clear that trespassing and abatement are two separate things. And yes, it will be like other green spaces. We will not be able to abate.
Has it always been the case that in this municipal facility, which is a campground, we couldn't remove someone who was staying there?
Through the chair, Mr. Dunbar, that is historical record. I could look into that and see if there's any opportunities or times where that occurred.
Yeah, and the reason I asked, it does seem like this facility is legally distinct from a park. It's a place where you pay a fee to be there traditionally. And so, similarly, there are other properties where we have removed people more speedily than the abatement process, right? If someone was in a different kind of municipal facility, let's say they went and pitched a tent at the bus barn, for example, I don't know that Martin v. Boise would apply in the same way. And it certainly is the case that, that's maybe a bad example because we don't rent spaces there. So historically, when people have been at this campground and have not been paying and have not legally been allowed to be there because they've been there for more than 14 days, has the city used an abatement process or some other kind of removal action when people were asked to leave the campground?
Through the chair to Mr. Dunbar, I'd be happy to take all those questions to the Department of Law and get you an actual legal analysis on those.
I think it's an interesting question. Although, for humanitarian reasons, it's probably the case that we will not be able to close this facility. But I think that the legal justification you're using is a fig leaf. And I don't think it holds water. And I mean, so once the 14 days have run, and actually they have run for most folks, and if we do not pass your ordinance on the 26th, and everyone at that camp is now illegally in that campground, will you still maintain the position that this is not part of our homelessness response?
Through the chair, yes. At this time.
I don't understand. Is there some legal reason the administration keeps putting forward this obvious fiction that is not part of our homelessness response? I mean, what is it? Why are you, not just you, Ms. Johnson, but the entire administration, why are you so comfortable telling people of Anchorage something that is clearly a lie? I mean, why do you feel the need to do this?
Through the chair, Mr. Dunbar, I don't believe it's a lie. We have just waived the fee at the campground.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and end this discussion and move us on to final Ooh, audience participation. Sorry, I gotta get back to reality. So, okay, so how many folks in the public would like to participate? Just, you already participated in initial. Anyone at all would like to participate in final audience participation? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone. Then seeing no one, I will go ahead and move on to committee discussion. Is there any final committee discussion before we adjourn?
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I should ask this question. So is Salvation Army maintaining the campground part of our homelessness response? Why is Salvation Army in this campground if it's not part of our response?
Through the chair to Mr. Dunbar, when we opened the campground for legal campers and waived the fee, we did have community partners aside from Salvation Army. We had ACH, 99+1, CSS. All of them were out at the campground. We never once said, hey, you guys can't be here. So Salvation Army is just taking the lead on that. One of the requests that we heard from a lot of the city partners was that we needed someone who wanted to coordinate. And so Salvation Army came online to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Cross.
Thank you. I was waiting until we talked specifically about the guest house, that purchase and remodel. I have some concerns about that.
Yeah, Mr. Cross, actually, I'm going to stop. I'm going to go ahead and pause you right there. So we are going to be talking about the guest house and the purchase specifically on the work session on Friday. So if you have any of those questions, please save them for that work session.
Greatly appreciate that. I will do so. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, not hearing any other committee discussion, I'm going to go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
I thought you were going to emphasize. Just quickly, I'm sure Dr. Boland can help elaborate on this, but HIPAA does not limit discussion of general occurrences at a location. What it limits is a provider giving specific information about a certain patient to others. So, Ms. Stefowski, HIPAA has nothing to do with the questions Mr. Dunbar is asking, just in case the public was confused. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and pause, see if there's any other community discussion. All right. Not seeing any. All right, I'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting. Thank you.